The bagpipes mean only one thing here in the studios of DERFCAST from the beautiful inner Sunset District of San Francisco. It's time for DERFCAST, episode number 55. And I'd like to say rest in peace, Superfly Snooker. Thanks for the memories, and let's go right into the show. You can listen to all of our shows, our past, present, and future, on SoundCloud and on iTunes under Ralph Tycho's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. But to get to either of those, type DERFCAST in capitals, DERFCAST. It's as simple as that. I'd like to thank last week's guest, Rock Rims. Thank you so much for being on. And we have a special guest, part 2 this week, Supermouth Dave Drason. Dave, are you there?
I'm here.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And I want to personally apologize in front of my millions and millions of listeners out there about the sound quality of last show. I usually apologize, and it will not happen again. I bought a new microphone, and we're okay to go. How is that?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me back on, and let's talk some old school wrestling.
Oh, my God. It's music to my ears. Thank God the holidays are over. Let's just start off by saying you were the original Sheik's one of his very last managers.
Yep.
And you have some stories to tell about him, I'm sure, that, we didn't get into last time. But since you were on last show, I did some research on the Sheik, and I was amazed at just how many wrestlers he wrestled. I think he's probably wrestled more wrestlers than probably any, not matches-wise, but different wrestlers.
Well, he went all over the country, and when he, basically started his career back in 1949, his very first match was against Lou Klein, who was a local here in Detroit. And the Sheik, worked around Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, Ohio. He stayed in this little Midwest area here because he was from Williamston, Michigan. But then he got a really good break going down to Texas and working for Dory Funk Sr. And he made a big name for himself down in Texas. And he came back to the Michigan area here and, worked all around in different promotions. They had Motor City Wrestling back then, and then the NWA promotion, the Big Time Wrestling. And up until, 1965, you just never know where you'd see, the Sheik in this area. He could be a mid-card guy. He could be a main event guy. And until he bought the promotion in 1964, well, then he became the top heel here. But, yes, the Sheik wrestled all over the world. I can't tell you how many times he went to Japan.
Oh,
so
the
number of opponents in Japan alone, go into the hundreds or thousands. And, more than anything, he did wrestle a lot of different guys, but his number one nemesis, and I think the one man that he wrestled the most over his career would have to been Bobo Brazil.
Oh, we talked about that last time. Let's stop talking about the Sheik. We can bring him back up. You're the guest on the show. I only brought up the Sheik. I don't know. I'm kind of sloppy today, which is the earmark of me and DERFCAST. I'm just who I am, and don't claim to be anybody else other than who I am. But back to you. You've managed other wrestlers. You promoted. You have been a ring announcer. You have wrestled. You have been a referee. You put the ring together. You sold things that shows you, my friend, have done it all in wrestling.
Well, when you say, I've done a lot of stuff. I managed, and I was a photographer and a writer for all the national magazines, from Wrestling Review, Wrestling Monthly, Ring Wrestling, all the After magazines. The Body Press program here in Detroit. I worked in the LA office. I, did stuff in the, Detroit office here. I set up the ring in different places, took it down, and, I did all that. But when, you did mention wrestling, I only wrestled twice.
But that means you've wrestled. That means you've wrestled.
Well, they were stipulation matches. You've had those matches where if the guy that you're managing loses, the other guy gets, 5 minutes in the ring with you. And that happened, once. Back here when I was managing Blackjack Luca, and we took on a partner called the Mad Iranian, and we went against Louis Martinez and Ron Martinelli. And, of course, we're going to lose, and I got to do the 5-minute thing in the ring. So the thing was, once we did lose, I had to get in the ring.
Right.
But, I just, you wasted the time. You go in there almost ready to lock up, or Louis was almost ready to, put his hands on me, and I jump out of the ring, waste time and stuff. But the funny thing is that the state commissioner was in attendance that day, and he kept on coming to the ring and trying to stop the match because I had a manager's license, but I didn't have a wrestler's license. And he tried to stop the match. And we're like, get the hell out of here, like you're going to kill all the heat that we got going. And he didn't care. He was the 75-year-old old geezer,
Right,
he
right.
just wanted his $15, fee that we had to pay, for a wrestler license.
Right.
So anyway, he tried to stop it, and he had the announcer announce that, we had to stop the match. And then it's like, okay, I just put the signal to Louis, like, okay, let's go home. And what happened is, like, I was bouncing off the ropes and missed and tripped, and boom, Louis gets me, and, I took, a bunch of bumps and, juiced and everything else.
Oh, my God.
The crowd went wild and, but, saved the day.
Gotcha.
So that was one time. But then there was another time, Toledo, Ohio, we had a group that was, formed by Jack Kane, who used to be the booker for Big Time Wrestling, and guys like Killer Brooks, Tony Marino, Ben Justice, Blackjack Luca, and a number of others went renegade promotion against the Sheep. So
really?
We were running Toledo once every month, sometimes once every 3 weeks at the Mimico Arena. And we had TV. We had Terry Sullivan with us, who used to be the announcer for Big Time Wrestling, ring announcer, and, on the TV. And we had everything going. So this one night, it's like I basically show up. I don't know who. I basically was managing Killer Brooks, Ben Justice, and Blackjack Luca at the time for the promotion.
Gotcha. The Stomper.
No, Ben Justice.
Oh, I heard, he was advertised once out here, Ben the Stomper Justice for the Battle Royal. That's why I said that.
Oh, that's not how it was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anyway,
sorry.
So anyway, I get to the arena that night. I got, my stuff that I always wear, for managing. So anyway, Jack Kane and Killer Brooks come up to me and they go, "You got your gear?" I go, "Well, no, I got my stuff. I mean, what do you mean by gear?" "Well, you're wrestling today." I go, "What? Nobody told me this." Well, they had advertised for the next month on TV and everything. I didn't know it, that it was going to be Killer Brooks and myself versus Tony Marino and the booker Jack Kane.
Oh, wow.
So, I had no idea. So anyway, it's like, okay, now I've got to come up with some kind of outfit, that, I'm going to have to willy-nilly this. So there was this one young gal there who, she was sort of a fan of mine and stuff, and she was sort of, a smaller gal. At that time, I only weighed like 140 pounds, So I go, "Hey, do you have any, like, hot pants or anything like that at home that I could borrow?" So she ran home, got a pair of hot pants and these hot pink, like, fishnet nylons, and, it was just so outrageous. So I did that. I wore, this mini, these hot pants, the fishnet nylons, and I borrowed Irish Mickey Doyle's boots.
Oh.
So I, had a pair of boots, and I went, sort of topless, and it was like, that was So anyway, we go out to the ring, and it's like, Killer Brooks and myself are going to, like 10 minutes of just getting heat with the fans. Toying with them, toying with Marino and Jack Kane. And at one point, it's like, we're going to start the match, and I want to start it. I don't want to get in there against Tony Marino and smack him around. Well, the fans are going to love that, but realistically, the match would be over in 2 minutes. So what ends up happening, Killer Brooks is talking me out of it. He goes, well, you got to exercise. Loosen up. So he had me get down and start doing push-ups.
Oh, God.
Well, at the time, as skinny as I was lucky to do 1 or 2 push-ups. So what happened was, I'm doing these push-ups, but Killer Brooks has his hand in the back of my trunks, or, whatever.
Okay.
Thing.
Yeah.
And he was lifting me up and down.
Right.
So it made it look to the fans like I could do push-ups of 50 at a time, effortlessly. And it just, it popped the crowd, and, we did a whole bunch of other stuff, and, Killer Brooks did most of the work in the ring. I'd get in every so often, get ready to lock up, jump out, save myself. But then, toward the end of the finish, Killer Brooks and myself, we collided. I took a bunch of bumps and stuff like that. Same thing, took a pounding, I juiced.
The juice
Killer Brooks
again.
carried me all the way back to the dressing room, and the fans went home happy.
Gotcha. Well, it's
what it was all about.
Brought back a memory to me that has nothing to do with wrestling. In boot camp, you had a partner, and you were, depending on, behavior or billet points or having your bed made right or whatever, you were assigned so many push-ups a day, and you and your partner had to do them. And everybody had to do 400 a day, if I remember right.
Yes.
Well, it'd be easy because your partner would just lift you up. You'd do sets of 25 before you went to eat chow, sets of 25 before you went in the shower, sets of 25 before you went to the library, before you went to this class or that class. So 400 was easy, but you didn't really do 400 because your partner was lifting you up by the belt exactly, like you did. And you each had to only do 200.
Yeah, but your sergeant or your drill instructor, whoever, he didn't care.
Well, no. Back then in boot camp in 1977, it was kind of lax. Nothing like probably you went through or people before us went through. They could hit us. That's a whole nother story. But a friend of mine who listens to my podcast, my partner in crime in wrestling, Bob of Bob's Radio Cafeteria, has asked a question of you. Dave, what's your favorite match you've ever been involved in at ringside or in the ring or managed a wrestler for?
There's so many memorable ones. If I think on some guys that I've managed, I'll go back and I'll lead up to. I mean, I can think of, managing Hartford Love and Bruce Swayze in a match in somewhere in Ontario, and it was against the McGuire twins.
Oh, 800 pounds?
Yeah. So it's like, oh boy, and I knew Hartford and Bruce were going to have to do all the work and, sell for them and stuff.
Oh my God.
So in the dressing room, later, that's like, we're going, well, how do we pop the crowd? Because, we're going to have to win somehow. Because we can't let them go over. So I got to talking to Billy and Benny, and they go, well, this is what we'll do. Says, you interfere, cost your guys the match, we get disqualified, so that way the McGuires still look okay. They didn't lose.
Right.
So, we go, yeah, that sounds good, okay. So what was going to happen is Bruce and Hartford, had one of the McGuires, in the center of the ring. So with the referee's back turned, I jumped up on the top rope, and I took a dive off the top rope, and I was going to hit one of the McGuires.
Oh, my God.
Well, what happened, the McGuire twin moved.
Oh!
Bruce and Hartford together. I hit them cross-body. They both go down. I land on top of them, and both McGuires lay on top of us for the, disqualification.
On 800 pounds of pressure, mind you.
Yeah. So then Hartford and Bruce roll out of the ring, and now I'm stuck in the ring with both McGuires.
Oh, what heat.
So the fans are going nuts now. So now what they did is, like, I'm trying to run and find a place to hide and run out, but I had nowhere to go. So it's like I ran, and one of the McGuires, I hit his stomach. So I took the bump in a way. I turned around like dazed, and then I ran into the other one. So they had me ping-ponging off their stomachs.
Oh, the fans must have been crazy.
Yeah. So then what happened, we did this about 5-6 times. You know, I went off the thing, and now I'm so dazed. Now I went down. And I landed, and they told me, land in the corner. So I landed in the corner, and what happened was one of the McGuires grabbed the ropes, and he sort of looked like he was sitting on it.
Oh,
but
God.
Actually, what was happening is just all of it, his fat was, basically, just drooping down.
Right.
And it looked like he was sitting on it.
He was doing what Rikishi did in the WWF not too long ago.
So then it's like, the crowd went nuts, and, that my guys made the save and carried me out. But the great thing about that was there was a local newspaper photographer there, and it made the front page of the paper the next day. It showed the back end of one of the McGuires holding onto the ropes, and my head sticking out of his rear end with my mouth wide open, like screaming.
Oh, do you have a picture of that for your collection?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That is great.
And then, there's matches that when I managed Al Snow and Mickey Doyle when they, worked as the Motor City Hitmen. Not memorable in a way of, the match itself.
Right.
But we had so much fun, amongst ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Because, when the manager, seems like he's giving instruction and stuff like that to the guys, it's like, I'm, teasing around with Mickey or Al, like, oh, man, do you see that girl in the second row over there with one tooth? Just, picking out stupid stuff, and we tried to make each other laugh.
Right.
And there's times we came close, but you did, it's like, you had to draw the line.
Guy had to walk that line.
Yeah,
well,
and then, like I mentioned, the match with Killer Brooks, where we took on, Tony Marino and Jack Kane, so memorable in my mind. But I think, when I look back, the number one, I can't pinpoint it down to one in particular,
right?
Because we went against him so many times. But it was when I was managing the Sheik and we went against Bobo Brazil.
Oh, part of history.
Those were just absolute, riots, with the crowd. The Sheik, he was up in years and so was Bobo, but they could still bring it. And with me, on the outside, the difference between myself and, people will remember Abdullah Farouk as the Sheik manager and Eddie Creechman as his manager. They did, great microphone work, on TV, where I really didn't have a lot of that opportunity, because we didn't have TV, when I was managing the Sheik.
Gotcha.
I did do some, but not to the extent every week, that those guys did. But the one thing I did that they did, I took a lot of bumps.
Gotcha.
And I would get involved in the match. So, I'd take, headbutts from Bobo and take, bumps and, geez. And, just to get the crowd going. So, there was a lot of the guys, I always said this in my career, managing guys like, Malcolm Monroe and Mickey Doyle and Al Snow and the Fabulous Kangaroos and, Bruce Swayze, Eric the Red, the Patriot, Hartford Love, those kind of guys. It was always fun. You took it serious, you did your job, but I had fun.
Well, that's a good question by Bob from the Clarence's. He owns
when you went out there with the Sheik, it was totally different. It was all business, no joking around, do your job, know what to do, when to do it, how far to go, and, for me as his manager, not to take the focus off the match.
So he would go over this with you before the match and tell, well, you probably knew it by then. I mean, was it standard formula?
We really only talked over the finishes. Who's going over and this is how it's going to happen. Everything else was just ad-lib. And, God bless, Sheik, that he let me do the stuff that I did. And I've seen him so many times, and I know what he's going to do. He's going to have, the hit number 2 pencil, and he's going to draw blood, and he's going to do this, and the pencil's going to fly, and just say, when that part happens, when
right.
Bobo, makes his comeback, the Sheik throws the pencil up in the air, and it lands in the middle of the ring. The Sheik's looking around. Well, me as the manager, it's like I'm trying to go under the rope, to grab it before Bobo gets it or the referee sees it.
Right.
But I made sure I did.
Gotcha.
Because we always wanted Bobo to get it.
Right.
Make his comeback and, pop the crowd. So, just the things that I did, I knew when to do it, how to do it, and, how much to do.
Well, this ties into Bob's Radio Cafeteria. You can see all of Bob's videos on YouTube. I'm really plugging Bob in this show. Ties in with this second question. Was there ever a wrestler that when you managed the Sheik that didn't want a gig but did otherwise through the Sheik's hands or his own?
Not really. Most of the opponents that we went against were guys that I knew from around big-time wrestling, all the time. Most of the baby faces like, Tony Marino or Louis Martinez or Bobo.
Gotcha.
I knew them. They were friends. So the good thing about that is they took care of my body when it was my turn to take the bumps and stuff.
Right.
So, they protected me. I did my job. And, we sent the crowd home happy.
Yeah.
But there was one time I can really remember. It was in Port Huron, Michigan. The Sheik went against David Sammartino.
Oh, say no more. Go for it. Tell me that. I can imagine.
It's like, I don't know this kid at all. All I know about him is that he's, Bruno's son.
Right.
Well, there was a friend of mine away from wrestling. She lives in Pittsburgh, and that's where David Sammartino is from. And she went to high school with him. So we're in the dressing room, and I introduce myself, blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, do you know that, so-and-so? Oh, yeah, we went to high school, So we, had this little conversation and stuff, and we had, the ice was broken between. So then we go over the finish, Sheik's going to go over,
Yep.
I'll take some bumps to make, Sammartino look good in the end. So what happened was, Sheik's outside the ring, he's selling an injury, I'm in the ring, and, I'm going to take these bumps for, David, and then what happens is he goes nuts. I don't know what happened. He just went bonkers. Not only, did I take, a few bumps here and there in the ring, well, the whole thing was to end, he was to throw me over the top rope. Well, when a wrestler goes over the top rope, and, if you ever watch it on TV, the guy usually, has him by the back of the, neck and by his arm, and lets him go like 3/4 of the way across the ring.
Right.
And you take your own bump over the top, and
right.
boom, done.
Because everybody has their own way of landing.
Right.
Yeah.
What happened this night was David Sammartino took liberties with me.
Ooh.
And he went all the way to the end of the rope with me, launched me over the top rope, and threw me onto this table.
Oh, Jesus.
Which I only weighed like 140-some pounds.
Right.
I'm not going to break a table. And I landed awkwardly, and it's like, oh, my God, one side of my body sort of went numb, and it's like, the very first thing is, you think of is, what happened to my body here?
Right.
And it's like, it took me a good solid month to recover from that. My arm, I would wake up in the middle of the night because my arm, I couldn't straighten it out. And
right.
it was just terrible.
What did the Sheik do?
Okay, that's one of the hazards of the job.
Gotcha.
But when I got back to the dressing room, Sheik noticed that, there was something wrong with me and the couple, and, I told him what happened. Well, she cleared the dressing room. Everybody, get the hell out. Everybody. And next thing we know, he took it upon himself to teach David San Martino a lesson.
Good.
And that was the last time David San Martino was ever in this area. I'll leave it at that.
Well, he didn't have a good reputation with Vince Jr. either. They gave him a little push, and he just wouldn't cooperate. I've read other stories where he just wouldn't cooperate in the ring. He'd go into business for himself. And,
that's why he never made it.
Right. Well, and then Bruno got him to wrestle either before or after Bruno got him Georgia Championship Wrestling. That was short-lived.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, thank you, Bob, the Clarences, for your two questions. They are appreciated. And you can listen to Bob's videos and watch his videos on YouTube of the Clarences. So, my question to you, when it came to managing the Sheik and gigging, what was the Sheik's preference? I mean, would he go for the same cut I know we're really getting into it here. I'll just come out and ask, would he go for the same cut night after night, or would it be the right side of his face at the end of the month, and then the next month he'd go to the left side of his face? I know maybe you don't know, but I thought I'd ask. I've always wanted to know that.
No, all I know is that, he had, his blade. He's always been a blade. But, I have to go back because, when I was a fan, just seeing him, ringside as a kid, working and stuff, and always blading. So he's going to bleed. But then there came a time where, he wasn't bleeding on the forehead. He was gigging his arm, his forearm.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And it's like, wow, so different. And I didn't know why. I just thought, the guy who was going against worked his arm, and he gigged it, and it's like, oh, wow, it's a heck of a different sound. Well, come to find out years later, and the same thing happened to Dusty Rhodes, is that they would gig so much on their forehead that at times there was so much scar tissue that they would blade, and they're only going through scar tissue, and they can't get through the skin, and it was hard for them to bleed.
Wow.
So, you just never know. I'd say most of the time, I managed to Sheik. He did bleed every night, but it wasn't to the extent of some matches when I was the photographer at Big Time Wrestling. I can remember a bloodbath with him and Tony Marino in this Italian death match thing. That both him and Marino, I have never seen so much blood spilled by two wrestlers in any match that I've ever been to in my lifetime.
Wow.
And, I've seen him bleed, other numerous times where it's like, he'd just be on his hands and knees, and you could just see the drops hitting the ring.
Right. Uh-huh.
But, I'll say the numerous times that I managed him over my career, he bled good, but I think he was running out of juice. Because it wasn't that, intense bleeding.
Right. He had it down to science, evidently. The reason why I'm asking is I listened to a Shoot interview with New Jack, and the only thing I'll mention about New Jack is he said Abdullah the Butcher went to a doctor, a surgeon, and had the surgeon dig out his forehead, those two crevices he had in his forehead, so that way all he'd have to do is lightly take a blade and touch it, and it would bleed. I was going to ask if the Sheik did that, or if you ever heard anything to that effect of Abdullah.
No, I would highly doubt that ever happened. Maybe only Abdullah could, verify that, but that sounds like a myth and fiction to me.
Gotcha. Well, okay, let's move on. When you first, let me ask you this. Your very first outside of being a photographer or writer or ring announcer, your very first time of being one of the boys, when was that, when you felt that? When you felt like, hey, I belong, I'm here. When was that, if you could remember that?
Oh, boy. That's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I met a lot of guys when I was a younger kid, walking around with my camera, collecting autographs and stuff. And times I would go to St. Louis for Sam Muchnick's Steel Auditorium shows and his TV shows, and I'd see guys there, the same thing. But my first photography coup to shoot up at the ring was for Sam Muchnick's promotion in St. Louis. And back in those days, Sam didn't let anybody up at the ring. No photographers, let the wrestlers do their thing. Don't want somebody getting in the way. Don't want somebody getting hurt. But a good friend of mine and my second dad, I always called him Don Wilson, who worked for the promotion, and he was the president of the Wrestling Fans International Association. Just a wonderful guy to me and helped me tremendously when I was a young kid. But he, mentioned to Sam, can he shoot up at the ring? And Sam Muchnick said, sure, if you think. And, I did a story on Sam, and I always promoted his guys, in the promotion, and always the shots that I took made the magazine. So, that, one incident there would maybe, it was my first, I sort of made it.
Gotcha.
But, and back home in Detroit here, I was still a fan sitting in my ringside seat. I couldn't, crack that, getting, my foot in the door at big-time wrestling and all. And at the time, I was only 14, 15 years old. So, but over time, I got lucky here in Detroit, and one promoter in Cincinnati, Les Ruffin, he always allowed me to shoot up at the ring down in Cincinnati. And all the guys that were in the big-time wrestling here in Detroit, they would see me and stuff, even though I wasn't allowed in the dressing room yet. But,
right.
I mean, the Sheik saw me, and Bobo saw me, and all the guys, and they gave me those, classic, gestures in the ring, if they got a guy in an arm bar or an arm lock, headlock or something, they look my way, give me that stare, so they, make the real shot. So, they helped me along there.
Wow.
But, when I finally, broke, through and became the first, I started, as a photographer, 1970, for big-time wrestling. And, I dealt with mainly the Sheik's wife, Joyce. And she allowed me, and she let the guards know at Cobo Arena that, he's okay, just let him go, And then it took a month or two before they were comfortable enough to let me wander through the dressing room and take, dressing room shots or pose shots and things. And so I had my, freedom to go in and out of there, starting, maybe I'd say that was early 1971. So that's when I think I finally, broke through and, I was accepted by all the guys.
Awesome answer. Well, let me ask you this. On the opposite end of that answer, was there ever a wrestler or someone in the business that just never accepted you, never accepted you and never wanted to be around you and made it tough for you to do your job?
Oh, God. There was a few when I was a photographer, like Lou Klein. Lou Klein was just an old, curmudgeon old bastard. I'll just put it that way. He didn't care. He was up in his age, and he didn't care about me or photographers or anything like that. A couple other guys, they weren't, cooperative when I was a photographer. But when I became a manager, it was a whole other story. Probably the first guy that's going to come to mind is Bulldog Don Kent. I was doing TV for George Cannon and his Superstars of Wrestling. And this one day Don Kent is, on the card with us and stuff. And he confronted me in the dressing room and threatened me and goes, you're not going to be managed on this show under my dead body. And it's like the way he said it, it scared me a little bit, and I left.
Right.
I just packed up my stuff and left. And George Cannon, calls me later that night and says, what happened to you? Because I was an intricate part of, what was going to happen on the shows. And I says, well, Don Kent threatened me, and it's like I wasn't sticking around. So I told him the story, and he never used Don Kent again.
Really? Good. Good for you for doing that.
There was a time, a good friend of mine, Dr. Eric Goldenberg, who me and him were best friends and hung around, and we did all the wrestling stuff together. There was a time, after almost every Detroit Hobo show, in the earlier days, guys would, stay over at the Sheridan Cadillac Hotel in downtown Detroit. And then the Tunnies from Toronto, they would, host this big party at the hotel bar. And so all the wrestlers came into the bar and stuff and, hung out and had drinks and drank for free. And, I was there and, we partied around with the guys. Even though at that time, I didn't drink anything at all. So this one time, I'm sitting there, and this other wrestler, sidles up alongside of me, and it happened to be Killer Buddy Austin. So he's sitting there, and he goes, oh, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a manager. And he got so upset, he was ready to kick my ass.
For no reason, other than you being a manager.
Yeah, but you had to remember back at that time, no managers were my age.
Gotcha.
I was 18 years old.
Oh.
And,
gotcha.
Back in, the old days, most of the managers were older, retired wrestlers or somebody
right.
that worked in the wrestling office, and they were older people, and their main job was they could go on TV, and they would manage guys who couldn't put themselves over.
Gotcha.
So now, I said to Buddy Austin that I'm a manager, and he looks at me, I'm this young 18-year-old kid, he thought I was, trying to kayfabe him or something. So he got really upset, and my, good friend, Dr. Eric Goldenberg, got in between us and calmed the thing down. But the whole thing after that was that Buddy Austin stayed at the Sheridan Cadillac Hotel for like 2 weeks while he was working the territory. And then come to find out, the hotel was asking us, how do we find this, Buddy Austin guy, because he skipped out on his bill.
Wow. Now, that has to be the guy that Freddie Blassie feuded with also?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Gotcha, okay.
Yep.
Just so I got my characters correct here, or wrestlers correct.
Yep.
Wow. You've been up and down on the roller coaster in your career. Let me ask you this. I've asked you your favorite match. What was your worst match that you just knew from the beginning? Well, you never know from the beginning. Well, maybe you do. What was your worst match? Let me just ask you that instead of getting all
scientific about it. Well, we would have to go back to that Cheat and David San Martino.
Gotcha.
That's like one of those career highlights that I wish never happened. But worst match, I would have to say, at the time, the Fabulous Kangaroos were together. And that's when Al Costello, one of the original Kangaroos, and Mickey Doyle were working together. And I was managing them. And poor Al, as much as a sweetheart of a guy he was, the career that he had, at this particular time, he was old, he was very balding and out of shape and couldn't work very well. And the crowd saw it, and they would be calling him Grandpa and, everything like that. It was just so embarrassing, to be up at the ring and hearing that and seeing it, and it's like, you just wanted to, the match couldn't get over fast. I'll just say that, But, to Al's credit, he was a sweetheart of a guy, very nice, helped a lot of guys, trained a lot of guys, had a spectacular career, early in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
60s, 70s, but by the 80s, God bless the poor guy.
Right.
He had
Well,
nothing else he could do, and, he wrestled well beyond when he should have been.
the same thing on the West Coast at the end of the Shires promotion happened here when Bob Geigel's guys came out. And I think I mentioned this to you before, but a bunch of my West Coast buddies here could readily agree. And God bless the guy, like you said. I have nothing against him, but Bulldog Bob Brown.
Oh, my God.
The worst, absolutely worst wrestler I've ever seen live that's been a veteran wrestler. People were throwing things at the ring, booing him, which was so uncharacteristic of the Cow Palace scene.
Was that in, like, the 80s or 90s?
Yeah, it was the 80s. I think it was the 80s.
And I saw Bulldog Bob Brown at, many Heel Auditorium shows in St. Louis, and a lot of times when I would go to Kansas City. And, he was, not Mr. Excitement, I'll put it that way. But there were so many promotions around the country that, gave a guy like that, an opportunity.
Right.
He wasn't going to be in the main event. They gave him a paycheck.
Right.
There were so many guys that worked for Frank Tunney in Toronto. It's like, oh, God, there was another guy, Bulldog, up there. His name is escaping me right now, but this guy was older than dirt. I think his first match had to be against David or Goliath. I don't know which one, but it had to be one of the two. There was, Killer Joe Christie.
Christie was around forever. I read about him. He was a real big ribber.
Mm-hmm. But, and then there's guys like the Spaceman Frank Hickey. Now there's a guy who took the business so seriously. It's like, and he was old, and, he was past his prime, but he had that Spaceman gimmick, which, God darn it, I loved to death.
Uh-huh.
And he was one of those old guys, and, he went out there and he got a paycheck. But to me, he was still entertaining.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask you this. We used to get, I think it was International Championship Wrestling. Jack Reynolds was the announcer, and a lot of the guys that you have mentioned were on it. The Love Brothers, both of them, George Cannon, Ernie Ladd, Luis Martinez. Did you ever, you ever wrestle for them or manage for them or photographer? Did you ever do anything for that promotion?
No, that was the old IWA.
Right, yeah, okay.
The Eddie Einhorn promotion, which Pedro Martinez was in on it, and, a lot of the former, big-time wrestling guys were on it. Like you said, Tex McKenzie, Ernie Ladd, Bulldog Brower, Mighty Igor, Argentino Apollo, Tex McKenzie.
Yes.
So all these guys. And when that promotion started, is when I started my managing career. So I was working mainly around here for the Killer Brooks, Tony Marino promotion. Carl Von Schatz, I got to give him a shout out on that too. And then when that started, started to dissolve, I had the opportunity to come down to Charlotte, North Carolina, and tried to get in with the Crockett promotion. And at the time, Sonny King was working there. And Sonny was a good friend of mine. So he, offered me to come stay with him, travel with him, and, we would meet with the, Crockett to see if I could, start a managing career. And this would have been 1975. And at that time, the Crockett promotion, which had Ric Flair going, Johnny Valentine was there at the time, Wahoo McDaniel, Ole Anderson, both the Anderson brothers. They had Tim Woods. They had a great pool of talent going at the time, but they had no managers, and they didn't want it. They basically said, we want to concentrate on wrestling. We don't want that extra kind of heat down here. So, as much as I tried, and, it just didn't work out. So I ended up, coming back home, and at that same amount of time, the IWA promotion started to fail. They ran some shows in, the big, I think, stadium show in New Jersey, and they tried to go to Baltimore and Washington, and they tried to, they were the first to try to make an international, a promotion throughout the United States, but it sort of failed. It's almost like, I'll say, what happened to WCW, at the end. There was too many chiefs, and not enough Indians. Everybody wanted to be, the boss.
Gotcha.
That was their sort of downfall.
That was their
Yep.
Yeah.
So what happened was, even though that started to disintegrate and fail, what happened was George Cannon came in and took over and brought that smaller part of that promotion to Canada, to Toronto, and started running Superstars of Wrestling. And that's when he brought me in to be their, top manager in the promotion. So, in a way, I didn't work directly for the IWA, but when they dissolved, I worked for IWA Phase 2.
Gotcha, understand. Yeah, we got those tapes here. I forgot whether it was on ESPN or a cable show, but I'm sorry, cable channel. That was an interesting promotion. It brought wrestlers that I'd only read about in the magazines on TV. Like, I'd never seen Bulldog Brower. I'd never seen the Love Brothers. It was an interesting promotion. Jack Reynolds. Yeah, Jack Reynolds was a different type of announcer than any other ones that I've ever heard. And he ended up going for a short run to Vince, of course, who grabbed every single announcer under the sun, it seemed like, at one point or another. Or, but that's
that's, what happened, to professional wrestling. A lot of these, at the time, so many of, the territories were going under because most of them were NWA, and they were under lawsuit, which, went to the Supreme Court. So many of these guys that, were working sort of, the independent contractor thing, and, we, were flying under the radar and stuff, and no health insurance and everything, and they had a monopoly for most of the arenas around the country. So if, a rival promoter tried to come in, well, they couldn't, book, the Omni in Atlanta, or, the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, or Cobo Arena in Detroit. So that monopoly, thing, was affecting a lot of the NWA promoters, and which started to affect, the whole territory of the United States on wrestling. So that was the start of, these groups, like Eddie Einhorn, and, later on, Vince McMahon, creating a global, promotion, and, which sort of worked. But you got to look at it also that, things change.
Mm-hmm. Oh, of course.
Not only in the sport of professional wrestling, but you look at, professional football. Look at football the way it was played in the 60s and 70s as opposed to the way it's played today.
Right. No comparison.
Back then it was more of a running game, and maybe, if you needed 6 or 7 yards, you threw a pass on third down. Well, look at how that's changed.
Yeah.
Baseball, where now the American League and National League are playing against each other. Now you have a designated hitter, which, that didn't happen in the glory days. Hockey, basketball, it's just everything. Everything changed.
Right.
And, professional wrestling, to me, being an old school guy and, growing up and seeing and being in the glory years, the 50s, 60s, 70s, now, kids today, they don't know the history of wrestling beyond the start of Macho, the Macho Man, and
right.
Jimmy Snuka, so many others that, don't even deserve the breath that I breathe to be even mentioning them.
Right.
So it's like, it always, affects me at times when, somebody will, be around and, they'll, hear that I'm in the wrestling, or was in the wrestling business and stuff. And they go, oh, wow, you managed the Sheik? You managed the Iron Sheik?
Right.
Jesus, Pete, just get away from me, idiot.
Yeah, we talked about that at the last show, and I feel the same way because I've always worn a Roddy Piper shirt. Always. I mean, I wore them. I made my own shirt before there ever was merchandise for Roddy. So when people recognize it, it would say, oh, well, Vince McMahon this, and no, Vince McMahon. He was Roddy Piper way before Vince. So I kind of relate to what you're saying, but you have a much bigger scale, with the comparison of, let's just say, the Iron Guy and the real Sheik. I don't even like saying Iron Sheik. Now, he never asked the Sheik for permission, did he? To use his name.
He says he did, and I can't confirm or deny, but I highly doubt the Sheik would have ever let that happen.
Right, exactly.
But, also you had so many other guys over the course of wrestling that used the Sheik gimmick. There's Sheik Adnan El Casey used it. There was other ones who, wore the headgear and the robe and the pointy boots and the little camel on the trunks, and it's like, come on, there was only one original.
Oh, of course, a great Mephisto, and it's funny you should mention Sheik Adnan El Casey. I might have sent you the match, I'm not sure if I did, but I saw a match on YouTube that was the Sheik against Billy Whitewolf. I think I got the name right. Well, that was Sheik Adnan El Casey before,
And look how many of those same guys, adopted not only the camel clutch as a finisher, but also through the fire.
Right. Well, Jerry. Yep.
Come on, can't you be original?
Right. Well, Jerry Lawler, I think, got away with it because he was the king in Memphis. But yeah. I mean, ever so often you'd see somebody throw fire besides the Sheik, and the first thing that would come to my mind, hey, that's the Sheik's gimmick. What's this about? I guess the Sheik taught him or something when I was younger, and I'd read it in the magazines. Don Fargo did. Jackie Fargo threw fire, which is probably where Jerry Lawler got it from. But Jackie definitely got it from the Sheik, and there's been numerous other wrestlers every once in a while would do it. Every promotion did it at one point or another. Freddie Blassie did it once. John Tolos. Now, let's shift to that. Now, you didn't manage the Sheik when he went to LaBelle. We talked about that before when he went down to L.A. for the LaBelle promotion.
No.
Are you familiar with that part of the Sheik's career? You feel like talking about that? Oh, well, let me ask you this. Did the Sheik first have snakes with him when he went to L.A. against Tolos, or when he went when he was in Michigan? Because I remember reading in the magazines, the Abner magazines, that the Sheik was afraid of snakes at one point.
Yeah, that whole thing came about. They were doing a big build-up with the Sheik and the Mighty Igor. And it's like, they came up with this idea, and Sheik had, pet snakes. So, somewhere, it was probably his idea, well, let's, incorporate the snake. And for like a couple months, Ivan Kalmakov, who managed the Mighty Igor here, he did all his talking for him on TV. It's like, we have the one thing that will finally defeat the Sheik and take that United States Championship belt off his waist. We have it. We know it. And they promoted this for like a couple months. And then when it finally happened, they brought this box with them to the ring, and the box stayed in the corner. And, the Sheik and Igor, and the Sheik was selling it. He was looking at the box and going crazy, that whole thing. Working the gimmick. And then toward the end, when the Sheik had Igor in the camel clutch, Ivan Kalmikov dug out the snake, threw it in the ring, and the Sheik went nuts.
I would have loved
that lasted maybe 2 or 3 shows. And then out of nowhere, the Sheik started carrying the snake with him. I mean, it was just never announced, or promoted. It's just that he started carrying his own snake with him. And, I'm sure he took it out to L.A. with him. I was never out in L.A. when the Sheik was doing that thing. But, the Sheik was, since the late 60s, early 70s, he was out there working. And, Mike LaBelle and the Sheik were very good friends. And the Sheik usually went to L.A. on his way to Japan. Because, you'd always have to stop in L.A., get your visas and stuff like that. Well, stay a week or so, do some shows for, Mike LaBelle, go over to Japan, work your shows in Japan, come back from Japan, you have to stop in L.A., work a show or two, and then come back home.
Right.
And Abdullah Farouk would always, go out to L.A. He wouldn't go to Japan with the Sheik because Japan never used any kind of manager.
Right.
So, Abdullah Farouk always went out there, did the TV for him and spoke for him and, promoted the show and did what he did, to put asses in the seats.
Exactly.
Which, worked every time.
Right.
But over time, I never saw that the Sheik, brought the snake with him out there.
Gotcha.
And that would have had to been in, 75, 76 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Later in the mid-70s that he would do that gimmick and go against Tolis and Blassie and whoever else was on top at the time.
Exactly. Yeah, Tolos brought a snake into the ring to scare the Sheik, and in the next couple of weeks, Sheik brought the snake, and that's how that. Well, let me ask you this. This ties into all of this. From the last show you were on part 1, on DERFCAST, you talked about Bobby Heenan being your favorite manager. The one manager we didn't talk about was Eddie Creechman. I'm really interested to hear your opinion.
Because all about you. Eddie Creechman came in at the time. Let me set the scene here. Abdullah Farouk, or the Grand Wizard, who he became, Ernie Roth, had an opportunity to go to New York and work for Vince McMahon Sr., managing, all the top heels there.
Uh-huh.
And he, went with the Sheik's blessing, because basically, excuse me, Farouk was only working like Detroit, Toronto, and maybe one other select city that, the Sheik wanted to come in. So, and Ernie Roth also was a DJ, on the outskirts in, Little Michigan. So when he had the opportunity, to manage full-time for Vince Sr., he went, and he'd be working almost every day. He went with the Sheik's blessing. So then, Sheik was, looking for another guy to bring in as a manager. Unfortunately, I was too young at the time to take the job.
Oh, what a shame.
And there was a guy in Montreal who was a referee, Eddie Creech. And just in the Sheik's dealings with, a lot of the guys in Montreal, the Rougeaus and, the other guys who were, heading up the promotion there, he brought in Eddie Creechman as his manager and mouthpiece, and, it worked.
Yeah, he was an interesting character.
He was a more over-the-top, ranting and raving kind of character, the sort of the mad Jew in a way.
Exactly, the mad Jewish landlord.
and him and my good friend Eric Goldenberg always hung out together.
Uh-huh.
My friend Goldenberg and Creechman, so they hit it off. They both loved cigars and stuff like that. When I wasn't able to be around, my friend Eric would, drive Eddie here and there, and they went to dinner, and, they were good friends.
Right.
For my taste, I was such a Farouk fanatic. I loved him. I loved his character. We were good friends. He was so nice to me when I was a young kid and growing up, and he mentored me. He knew I wanted to be a manager. He would tell me the little things,
right.
And that's what I say about when I was becoming a manager, that Abdullah Farouk, Ernie Ron, taught me how to present yourself on TV. How to do the talking. Bobby Heenan mentored me on what to do in the ring, how to take the bumps and stuff like that. Really get yourself over differently with the fans. George Cannon mentored me on how to do it, when to do it. He explained to me that, you're the side attraction. People in the seats, they want to see the wrestling and the wrestler in the ring. They don't care about you. In a way, they do, because you're that antagonizing little character. But you have to pick your spots not to take the focus off of, inside the ring. A lot of times, now going back to your original question on Eddie Creechman, there was a lot of times he did that. He was afraid to be outside of the ring and on the ring floor because he got so much heat and he's such an easy target, he was afraid of the fans attacking. So a lot of times he would pace back and forth on the ring apron. Just ranting and raving, running along on the ring apron and antagonizing the referee, which took away a lot of times from the match. So, not that I have anything against Creechman. He was good. He did his job. I was more of a Farouk guy, not a Creechman guy. But when he did leave, I got my opportunity.
Yeah, that all makes sense. You were mentored by three of the greats.
Oh, yeah.
All-time greats. No, there isn't anybody that could hold, outside of yourself, that could hold a candle to any of those three gentlemen. My God. I think out of the three, though, I'd have to say Bobby was the best, because we said this before. Like yourself, he could do it all, and he did it all.
And that's the thing about wrestling managers that a lot of people don't see. If you look back in the territory days, each territory had their main manager that worked in the territory. A lot of times it would have been Gary Hart in Texas. Even though Gary Hart went other places, he did more wrestling in other places than he did managing. Dr. Ken Ramey down south. Me here. Bobby Davis. That's a hard one to pinpoint. Sal Weingeroff stayed in, the Kentucky, Tennessee sort of area. And I'm sure up in the Northwest, there was, they had their own managers there. But we didn't go cross country and work different promotions, and that's what I say. Managers were a side attraction. We, didn't make a lot of money. A lot of people think that, okay, we're the jet flying, cigarette, smoking, we live in, mansions and everything. The managers didn't make the same money as wrestlers did. And that's why guys, certain managers like Gary Hart, Lou Albano, Freddie Blassie, Bobby Heenan, they can get in the ring and wrestle. And that's where they made their money. They may have made their name as the mouthpiece and a manager, but they survived by getting in the ring and wrestling, which I couldn't do.
Gotcha.
I was too small.
Right.
I was never a wrestler, didn't have a wrestler build or anything. And it took me my first year or so in the business to wonder, first bloody sake, how am I going to survive in this? I'm doing what I love, but I'm not making, much money. And that's where, Bobby Heenan really explained to me. It's like, well, yeah, I didn't make a lot of money managing either. I made my money, going in the ring and wrestling, which you worked for him because a lot of, fans saw him as the manager. But when he got in the ring and wrestled, he already had heat because it looked like, he's the smaller guy going against, the Bruiser, Bob Ellis, or the Crusher. He's just, the fans couldn't wait to see him get his ass beat. But in the ring, he could handle himself. He was great. He knew moves. He took a lot of bumps. He bladed a lot. Oh, my God, you talk about blood. Bobby Heenan could have supported a, Red Cross station in every city that he ever run.
Oh, my God, yeah. People out there, go to YouTube. If YouTube has any matches of him battling, managing the Valiants. Oh, my God, we got the magazines here. Every magazine would either have him or the Valiants on the cover more often than not. Blood just everywhere. He managed the Blackjacks, the same thing. He was kind of like Bruiser's favorite target, which wanted to go back to a person you had mentioned, a wrestler you had mentioned. One of the biggest feuds that were in the Abner magazines, which basically when I was growing up was the only source of information of any other wrestling association or promotions, to a 10-year-old, 12-year-old boy, was the Abner magazines, was a feud between Tony Marino and Killer Brooks.
Oh, what a feud.
You care to talk about that?
They both came into the territory sort of the same time in a way. I mean, Killer Brooks was here first, but he came in first as Tim Brooks, and he was an enhancement talent, doing jobs, at Cobo and on TV. Then he switched and tried to be the Hangman. Came in, in all black and a hangman's noose and stuff, and, he was the lovable heel that got beat, and then over time, he came in as Killer Brooks, and then people started chanting Crazy Brooks, so they changed his name to that, and, he was still Killer Brooks, and he worked his way up the hard way. He went from, zero to hero in, sort of a short time. Tony Marino came in after his Batman gimmick, sort of died down in, the East Coast and Pittsburgh area, and that's where Tony is from, is Pittsburgh. Well, he came in and started working for Big Time Wrestling. And, from the very first time that the Sheik, who's the promoter here, put them two together in the ring, oh, my God, it was just unbelievable magic. I'll say that. Because they both can work. Tony can, go at it, do the moves. Brooks can do his heel thing. He can take the bumps. And when these guys went in the ring, they made it believable, to the fans because they loved laying it in. They didn't take a soft punch, a soft kick, or anything. They laid it into each other, and they loved it. They loved it. I can't say that they loved the passion of pain, but that's what, they sacrificed their body to make it believable and entertain those fans. And when it came to every one of their matches, that's the way they worked. They bled, they sweat, they worked, not a 5-minute match. They always went a good 20, 30 minutes, and it was exciting from start to finish.
Oh, I mean, the magazine write-up by Abner was just amazing for a kid. I mean, it was about a chain match. I still remember it like it was yesterday.
Those were my pictures.
Wow.
Yeah,
awesome.
The Aftermath,
awesome.
Bill used my photographs because they did like a series, almost maybe like a 6-month thing, where, Tony and Killer Brooks did, these chain matches, bloodbaths,
right,
throughout the territory.
Right.
And God, they were brutal. They were just brutal.
Oh.
I'd be up at ringside, right up at the ring, and hearing those chains and the straps hit their backs and hit their heads, and watch them bleed, and them laying in the punches and stuff. And it's like, after I was done, I got some great photographs, and then you go back to the dressing room and be with them, and it's like I could not, hesitate to say, God, what a great match. What a great match. They don't see wrestlers once they get back in the dressing room. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't if things went well in the ring. And they can only feed off the crowd. But they really liked hearing it from one of the boys, how it went.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's the best compliment. Well, one of the boys tells you that it's a good match, or, it went well, or they like something you did. That was the ultimate compliment.
I've only been backstage to 2 matches since independent promotion out here. I won't name the name because they'll kick me out if they know I'm talking about them backstage. Keep it kayfabe, I guess. But you're right. As soon as the wrestlers come through the door, they light up when another wrestler says, "Hey, great match, great match."
And I do that here. I don't go to a lot of independent shows here. XICW is like one of the best promotions, independent promotions around this area right now.
Gotcha.
And it's run by Malcolm Monroe Jr., who I managed his father. And I'll have to mention this also. I'm so proud that we are going back to the Cobo Arena in October of this year.
Right.
They're promoting a show there. We're having a Legends, fan fest and everything. Great lineup of stars on the show. It's the return to the Cobo, the first time in 37 years.
Wow, that is amazing. 37 years.
Yep.
Jeez. Time just flies by. And is that a new Cobo Arena, or have they torn it down yet? Or
no, Cobo Arena still stands. Where the wrestling used to be. See, there's like Cobo Arena and Cobo Hall.
Oh,
the
gotcha.
Hall is like right now they have the auto show there, and it's like a one level, just long and big hall. Cobo Arena, with the seats and everything that they used to have, that has been all gutted, and it's now a 2-story facility. The lower portion is meeting rooms, and the top level is like a giant circular ballroom.
Gotcha, and that's where you guys are going.
The arena that, wrestling used to happen in the 60s and 70s, it just doesn't exist in that form anymore.
Gotcha, but
we're still going back and running a show in Cobo.
Gotcha. Now, are you going to go back to your managing roots, or are you going to be the ring announcer, or referee, or promoter, or booker, or?
They've asked me to come and, participate. I don't know what my capacity of what they want me to do.
Gotcha.
First and foremost, I don't want to manage anything. And I say this not that I wouldn't want to, but just over time, the main East Coast, promotion that's out there these days that basically killed off anything that resembled a wrestling manager. And then I see wrestling managers these days, and there's a whole bunch of them out there, independent guys, and they run around and they grab trunks and they interfere and stuff like that. And, God bless them for trying to do, what they think a manager should be. Managers back in our day were more it was more bringing in the fans into the match, and you were part of the story. And that's what wrestlers did back then. They told a story in the ring, and the manager was part of that story. Now a manager is just part of the chaos. So, oh, geez, how can I say, the fans just don't get these days. The fans of today who've grown up on, the wrestling that they watched on TV and, from the 80s on, this junk that, us old schoolers just can't stand.
Right.
But that's, when, managers, post-1980, most of them have been these big-breasted women who were valets, and they call themselves managers who they were only eye candy,
that's
and
it.
They had no other function or, involvement in a story in a match at all.
Right, and that's what, like you said, times change. Managers, this is my old humble opinion, I hope there's some credence to it from you, it would make me feel better. A manager back then, such as yourself, a Ken Ramey, a Heenan, a Cannon, knew when to interfere, knew when to bring attention onto himself, which was very rare, indeed, during the match, because there was only a couple spots that, called for it. Nowadays, forget it. It's a forgotten art, I think. It's just forgotten of how to be a wrestling manager, how it should be, which is why I push your ass into the equation at this upcoming match in Kobo and show them how it's done.
I can show them how it's done, but they're not going to get it.
Oh, of course they're not going to get it.
It's just not in their mind and psyche of what an old school manager is. They're going to wait for me to pull tights, grab a boot, interfere in the match, hand my guy something, and it's like, that's not what it's all about.
Well, of course, no, I'm just coming from... Go ahead.
I got to give kudos to Paul Heyman. He can go out there as a manager, but he's an advocate.
I love that
he's
part.
He's great on the microphone.
Yes. If there's
as far as managing, he doesn't do anything really as a manager.
Not anymore. You're right. Not anymore. He could. I think he'd be the only one that could pull it off. I really, really do. Unless you get one of the wrestlers themselves.
I'll say this. He has the opportunity to do it because he's on TV.
Right. No, you're right. I agree.
And I'll have to give kudos to a local guy. Good friend of mine. Known him since I was a kid. We were both kids as photographers and stuff. But there's a kid, and he's, my age now, working. He still works independent shows here around Michigan. His name is Handsome Johnny Bradford.
Gotcha.
Unbelievable the way he goes out there and works like an old school manager does. And still, a lot of times, I watch him, and it's like he's so tremendous. He does it the old school way, the way it's supposed to be done. But still, the people in the seat don't get what he's doing. But I do. So I enjoy it. Even though that they don't know, I enjoy what he does, and I appreciate what he does, keeping old school alive. And I think if there's one manager in this whole United States, independent or on TV or anything, Handsome Johnny Bradford is the best I've ever seen, in the scene today.
Wow. And that's coming from Supermouth Dave Drason, who has graced my show for the second time now. I'm in awe. When you give somebody that big of a recommendation on my show, I'm going to YouTube them and check them out because I'm all about old school. I just, I try to explain this to my friend Bob. He finally is getting it. It's like old school is dead. They're just, it's like, I guess I could point it out like this. The Royal Rumble's coming up, and some of the biggest pops that will be in that pay-per-view is anybody that's old time to now. And it's just people want old school, but it's just something that will never come back,
On that same genre of what you're saying, 10 years from now, if you have a child today, 10 years from now, you explain to him this phenomenon that was around for 150 years, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey circus. They go, What's a circus? Well, they used to have tigers and cages and elephants and clowns and aerials. And they go, what? What's that? It's almost, to us old schoolers, that's what the wrestling product is now that's, being shoved down our throat.
Right. Oh, you said it perfect. I mean, sure, I admit I do watch Raw sometimes, maybe every Monday, and wait for the main event and fast forward it, or a few wrestlers, but I do not devote 3 hours each Monday night. I do watch pay-per-views occasionally. I got really turned off when McMahon threw this young kid, I don't even remember his name. He has 2 chins and weighs about as much as I do, 150 pounds, and thrusted him into the main event picture. I quit watching it because it was just such a slap in the face to old school and to other wrestlers on the card. So now they quit main eventing him. So, I mean, I'm kind of excited for the Royal Rumble. That's about the only, that and WrestleMania, the really 2 pay-per-views from McMahon that I really look forward to, only because of the pomp and circumstance. And the format of the Royal Rumble just brings me back to the old Pat Patterson Royal Rumbles. I have to say that.
Even though I don't watch it, I belong to a bunch of, Facebook wrestling, threads and stuff, and
right.
I contribute to those things. And, you can't help but read, the young kids who are writing about, the wrestling that they see on Raw or
right.
SmackDown and stuff like this. It's like WrestleMania and most of these other things. It's like, how many? They've already seen those matches already.
Right.
They're on every other Monday. Cena versus Roman Reigns. And, oh God, I don't know.
Oh, that's okay.
Shows these days, but it's going to be the same thing that they saw on Raw, except now you're going to have to pay $1,000 to have a seat to go watch it.
Right. Well, exactly.
On TV.
Exactly. I mean, I will not pay over $25 to go to a match. Period. To McMahon at all under any circumstances. I did once, and that's when WrestleMania came here to Santa Clara, because it's WrestleMania. Roddy was there. Ronda Rousey was there. I had to go. But to get back what we're saying, old school, I do this podcast for old school. I mean, I developed it myself. I reached out to people such as yourself. Well, your buddy Craig put me in touch with you. But I reached out to Mickey Doyle. I reached out to Vandell Drummond, Billy Anderson, just out of old school, the love of old school. And, I mean, if I just keep having you 8 or 9 people rock riddle on, I could do it for the rest of my life because it's old school and it's a dying art. It might as well be dead. Yeah, I do whatever I can to keep it.
It's
keep it alive.
Is what it is. And it's such a big, full production. It's almost like, going to, I'll say a Bruce Springsteen concert. It's promoted. You know what you're going to get, and there's so much production behind it. It's like every second of the show has to be, scripted and, as opposed to back in the old days, it's like, you just weren't a promoter and got a bunch of guys wrestling and put up a ring and throw a show. And, there was more to it.
Well, of course.
There was like, you had to have, here, let me try to break it down and see if I can remember stuff that, when we were doing things that, you needed to put on a show. First, you need your venue, okay? Be it the, Cobo Arena, the Omni, Olympic Auditorium. You need a ring, okay? You need the guys to set up the ring and take the ring down. You need the guys to put up the chairs around ringside and everywhere else. You need the ring lights. You need the ticket sellers, sales or the box office, the night of the show. Then you need the ticket takers to get in the show. Then you need security. Police or, private security, whatever you need. You needed a PA system. You needed a microphone. And if, there's times I've seen it not happen, if you've got a tag team match and you don't have a tag team match rope that, the partner outside the ring had to hold on to,
right,
to make it believable, you need a belt.
Well,
you need a dressing room.
What you're describing is basically all old school.
Wait a minute, I'm trying to. You needed a program.
Right.
Give the fans, let them know who's on the card. You needed somebody, to go out there and, put posters and do some of the publicity, and that would have been the promoter or the promoter's helpers. After the show, you need a guy to pay off the boys. Then you hopefully, if you're a smart promoter, you get a photographer, and or a writer to hopefully publicize your show. Then you need, once the guys are in the ring, you need a kid, anybody, to take the ring jack back to the dressing room.
Right. Yeah.
You need a guy in the ring who's going to announce the talent. You need a referee. Sometimes you have a manager, you'd have the talent, but most of all, the most important thing to run any wrestling show, after all this stuff I said, the ring, the venue, the ticket takers, and lights and everything, you need the fans.
Yep. Yes.
If you don't have the fans, you're not going to have a successful show.
It's not based on fans anymore. It's based on what McMahon throws on the wall, what sticks, and merchandising. It's a network. It's just, it's a conglomerate, And the sad thing is, we brought it up earlier. It's the perfect analogy is, you manage the Iron Sheik. Well, that says it all. That says it all right there.
Now, that, to me, that's an insult.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. That's where old school is gone. It's a sign of the times. But I'm so glad that, what you just described, maybe, somebody will make somebody listen to this podcast and learn that those ingredients you just mentioned are what made wrestling real and believable and fun,
Here, let's play a little game.
Sure, let's go for it. We got time.
Just for the heck of it, this is a stupid idea that just came in my mind.
No.
And let me see how much of an old school wrestling fan you are.
Okay, let's go for it.
Back then, we had our, kayfabe kind of talk, and we had our own language that we used.
Right.
Okay, let me ask you, what is an angle?
An angle is what is going on. Like, say, wrestler A is being interviewed by the announcer. Wrestler B comes up and hits him on the head with a chair during the interview. He blades. Well, they're going to have a grudge match. That's an angle.
Okay, old school. An angle to today's fans, they think it has something to do with high school math.
You got that so right.
Okay. And what's getting blown up?
Blown up is when the guy's in the ring for 3 or 4 minutes and he still has 30 minutes left and he's out of shape.
Okay, good. Old school. New school means not a photographic 8x10 enlarged.
Or a steroid beast. That could be blown up.
A mark.
Okay, I have 2 answers for that. I'm a mark for Roddy Piper. Okay, now that that's over, a mark is somebody who thinks it's real and just is over the top with his belief of wrestling. Just somebody who just doesn't see it for what it is.
Okay. Good old school. New school, that means something that you can't rub off with an erase. I'm just talking, the mindset of today's wrestling fans.
You're right, and I freely admit it to anybody that will care to listen to me. I am a mark for Roddy Piper. That's it. Let's keep going.
Okay. Let me think.
Always have been.
Juice.
Juice is blood.
Okay. And new school is, something that they drink for breakfast.
Right, or they're juiced up, blood means green, or red means green.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, let me think Bobby Heenan here. Ham and egg.
Oh, God, a jabroni, an opener, a curtain jerker.
No. New school fans think that's a breakfast special at Denny's.
Listening to Heenan being a color man, there was never a better color man than Bobby Heenan. We never touched that part, but go ahead, keep going.
We'll get there. Let's see. A potato.
Oh, real punch.
Okay. So not a new school fan. That's not their favorite vegetable.
No. I got potatoes a week ago Friday. Got 7 stitches.
Arena rat.
Oh, somebody I wish I could. Never mind. Arena rat is a lady, ugly, beautiful, or whatever, who tries to be a groupie for the wrestlers.
Okay, old school. New school means that's their favorite vegetable. DQ.
Disqualification.
Dairy Queen.
They're going out of business. There used to be one in Berkeley, but it's gone. That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, a pin.
Oh, a pin is the end of the match. 1, 2, 3.
No. It's something you find in a new shirt that you buy.
We are so old. You're older school than me. It's just, how do I put it? It's just dying. It's dying, The terms you just brought up bring so many memories, I encourage anybody out there to read biographies of wrestlers, older wrestlers, before Chris Jericho and Mick Foley's biographies, other wrestlers,
there's so much. Here, try this one. The gig.
Oh, that's to cut yourself.
No, jamming with your band. The shoot.
That's when two wrestlers go at it for real.
No, something not recommended by the NRA.
You've heard the old story of Don Owens' brother who was from Eaton. I forgot his first name, but he'd give $5 or $10 to the best 5 minutes of shoot wrestling to his matches in the Pacific Northwest. He promoted the smaller towns, Eugene, Springfield, and towns like that in Oregon. The wrestlers would split the money and how did I put it? Okay, I got to tell the story better than this.
Let me put one more to you.
Oh, okay, go ahead, and then I'll tell the story.
Because it popped in my mind.
Yeah, no.
The last of our game. You're winning old school. You're winning old school so far. Now this will be your ultimate, final Jeopardy question.
Okay.
Kayfabe and Matt Burns.
Oh, well, Matt burns is when you get your head or leg or something rubbed against the mat and you get a burn. And kayfabe, it's hard for me to explain kayfabe, but if you walked into a wrestling dressing room, everybody would shut up and start talking carny or would just ignore you. Kayfabe.
New school fans think kayfabe and Matt Burns is the latest winning couple from Dancing with the Stars.
Well, I should have a better explanation of kayfabe, but that's my explanation.
So you win. You're old school.
I love you for that. Thank you, Dave. That means a lot coming from you. The story of Don Owens' brother. Don Owens was a long-time promoter in Oregon, Washington. I'm sure you heard of him.
Yes.
His brother, I think his name was Eaton Owen, I forget his brother's name. But he would pay, because it amused him, $25 to the match on the card that the wrestlers would shoot the best. Well, finally, Roddy Piper and Killer Brooks, because they were a team, told all the other wrestlers about it. Hey, fake shooting. Fake a shoot, and we'll split the money. So that was the norm for them. And another story.
I would love to have been up there when Piper and Killer Brooks would have been working on the same show.
Oh, they were a great tag team up there for a while. You could YouTube some of their stuff. Another story Roddy told and another wrestler told was Owen. I wish not Don Owen, but Eaton Owen. Oh, God, I should know his first name. Killer Brooks, he'd complain all the time, the promoter would, all the time about paying out money. Always just had a sour look on his face. And the thing was, if you smiled, he'd quit counting the dollar bills out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he put his cigar down, the promoter did, Owen did, and Killer Brooks shoved it up his ass for a while, or a couple of seconds, and put it back on the table. Well, the promoter came out from back from the bathroom and put the cigarette in his, the cigar back in his mouth, and as he was walking out the door, he said, "You guys all smell like shit." I mean, Roddy tells the story a lot better, you know, but that was the story. But, yeah.
Well, Killer Brooks, he was a big river, too. I mean, he was on the receiving end, but, oh, God, there's so many times that I rode with him and be in the dressing room with him, and he always had that sticky cigar and that elbow pad of his, which smelled like hell. One incident I remember, we were at the Toledo Sports Arena one time, and there was this one fan who would come up from Dayton. We called him Mikey Pooh. He was this little midgety kind of effeminate, guy.
Right, yeah.
And he always liked to be around the heel wrestlers. He found the heel wrestlers that really turned him on. And he had this high, squeaky voice, like a feminine guy would and stuff. But he really loved Killer Brooks. He really loved Killer Brooks. And this one time, just Killer Brooks just couldn't stand being near him. So this one time, he had a photo album with him.
Uh-oh.
And Killer Brooks came out to, grab a cup of coffee or watch one of the matches. And Mikey Pooh was out there, and Mikey Pooh opened up his thing and asked Killer Brooks if he would sign his autograph for him.
Oh, no.
Killer Brooks grabbed him by the back of his shirt, pulled him in the dressing room, took his clothes off. He just ripped his clothes off. And then he took his photo album, and then he took his athletic tape and taped it around him, and then threw him outside the dressing room door.
What the hell happened after that?
Oh, this poor kid was just crying his eyes out and stuff, and I felt so bad. But it's like, I'm not the one to step into the situation by no means.
Yeah, you don't want to get in the way of Brooks.
No. And he got a good laugh out of it. But, there's just so many stories about ribbing.
Oh, my God, that could be a show in itself.
Stuff that comes to mind, riding together. After a Cobo Arena show on a Saturday, a lot of times we'd have to go up to Toronto on Sunday for the Toronto Frank Tunney show. So this one time, Bobo Brazil, Tony Marino, and myself, we're going to drive up together. So it's about, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We all meet downtown Detroit, and we hop in Tony Marino's big Cadillac. Big green cat. So anyway, the very first thing that we have to do is stop at the duty-free store, by the Detroit Windsor Tunnel. Because Bobo has to get 2 liters of Canadian Club whiskey.
Oh, okay.
1 liter to drink on the way up, 1 liter to drink on the way back.
Jesus. That's a lot.
On the way up, Bobo's drinking the most, and we're talking and, stuff like that. Tony, every so often, he's driving. He has a sip. So we go up, do the show. After the show, the boys always go into Frank Tunney's office. He's always got food and drink there for them. And, they party a little bit, and then, we have to drive home. So on the way back home from Toronto, on the 401, driving back to Detroit, Tony Marino's driving. And Bobo's got the second bottle out. So now both of them are hitting this bottle. And I'm an 18-year-old kid. I didn't drink. They passed the bottle to me. It's like, I put it up to my lips and not even drink anything. Pretend that I took a sip, and hand it back to them. So we're right about London, Ontario, halfway back. And apparently Tony Marino, how, you say Italians do do, they talk with their hands a lot.
Uh-huh.
So he's driving, he's talking with his hands, he's getting boisterous. Next thing you know, here's a red light. Cop comes, pulls us over. It's like, oh my God. And they're handing this bottle to me. It's like, hide it. It's like, where the hell do I hide a, bottle of whiskey? So anyway, the cop comes to the door. Tony rolls down the window and says, can I help you? And an officer looks in. He goes, oh, Tony Marino, Bobo Brazil. Oh, where are you coming from? Wrestling in Toronto, blah, blah, blah. They have this small talk. And he goes, well, the reason I stopped you is like, you're going all over the road. You're crossing the middle line. So Bobo immediately speaks up, and Bobo has had the most to drink. He's had already like a liter in him from on the way up, and he's got more than a half a liter in him on the way back. So Bobo says, that's how these Italians are. They talk with their hand, So the officer goes, well, Tony, you better, get in the passenger seat and let Bobo drive. And it's Bobo was the one who had the most to drink. So that's the way we came back home, and almost all the way back home, Tony Marino was just like so livid that the cop made him not drive, and they let Bobo drive. And even me, I'm, an 18-year-old kid. Now, I don't drink. I figured, well, these guys are professionals. They're adults. That's what they do. They drink liquor. I didn't know about this whole drinking and driving thing. So it's like, whole different world these days, and, you couldn't do that kind of stuff today.
Oh, of course not. See, that also falls under the category of old school.
Yep.
It sure does.
Oh, God. You speak of old school like that, I remember Killer Brooks telling me a story when he first started. Himself, Dusty Rhodes, and Dick Murdoch always rode together. And after a show, they'd stop at a bar, which back in those days, bars sold, cases of beer. You could take it out.
Right. People don't know that.
No.
Yes, they did.
So they'd always get a case of beer apiece. And then, they'd be drinking all this beer on the way home, and those were long shots down in Texas back then. And Killer Brooks says, well, you got to, duty calls at some point. So he pulled the car off to the side of the road. So anyway, they pull off the side of the road. Now they're going to have a contest. Who could pee the farthest? So they're facing the medium in the center of, the highway. So, like, Dusty Rhodes, I think, went first, and he's got this stream going, and it went one lane.
Uh-huh.
Dick Murdoch goes next. He's taking a pee. He goes like a lane and a half. Killer Brooks said he takes his out. He's got a stream going over 2 lanes of traffic. So it's like, just to see something like that, or to have a video or photographs of, stupid things that we used to do back then that I don't think we can ever get away with these days.
Well, with the current events of, let's just say, pee jokes and things of that sort in the news today, maybe we should end today's show. We've been on more than 9 minutes, and ask you right away if you can come back for part 3, which there's just, you are a treasure of information. And,
well, I will come back from, we have to negotiate this like we did the last one. You gave me my, payoff for the first show. Then you gave me, we said if I do part 2, you would double it.
Just, well, I'll triple it. How about that?
Okay.
How about that?
With that in mind, I will do it. And just so the fans know, I got nothing for the first show, so when he doubled it, I got nothing for the second show. So unless you're a moron, you know what I'm going to get for the third show.
Oh,
I'll be more than happy to do it.
Dave, thank you so much. I have one last question to ask. During the San Martino sheep match, David San Martino, that is, did David gig?
No.
Really?
Yep, he was the only one that gigged.
Gotcha. Well, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think he was too much of a wussy.
Yeah, it's just, not unbelievable. That man could have had mega push, been a mega star. Who knows? Who knows? The truth will never come out because even Bruno himself refuses to talk about it. You know?
Yeah, Bruno, such a great guy, so nice. And people don't realize, they think Bruno Sammartino was always this champion and, icon of the old WWF. But in reality, in the late 50s, Bruno Sammartino was blackballed by Vince McMahon Sr.
Well, I didn't know that.
Refused to use him, blackballed him from ever working any promotion in the United States.
Wow.
And the only promoter that took the chance on him was Frank Tunney in Toronto, who made Bruno a star before he went back to New York.
I'll be damned. We could definitely talk about that, and also other promoters that the Sheik never worked for. I know we touched base about Roy Shires and all of that. The Sheik did work here for a while. The early promotion of Shires, Shires used him a lot. I should take that back.
Two subjects that I would really love to talk about in stories on the next show.
Definitely.
Part 3, to make it interesting for people to come back and want to listen. First and foremost, a wrestler who I thought was the most underrated, underused talent in the history of professional wrestling. And that would be Chris Colt. So many stories about Chris. Knew him when he was young and first starting out, really nice to me, and a story on when I would have had the opportunity to manage him.
Oh, great.
Well, second, if you're old school, and if you're a manager and a wrestler in the wrestling business, and if you don't have a Dr. Jerry Graham story, you were never in the business. So let's talk a little Dr. Jerry Graham on part 3.
Well, I promise you, not only that, but I will try and get a guest caller in who also managed Dr. Jerry Graham in for part 3, besides yourself.
Okay, and if those initials are VD, Mr. Venereal Disease himself, I would be glad to be a participant in that show.
And his first words after hearing this are going to be, "Oh, Krishna."
Well, I thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you.
Hope people and fans enjoyed it. I hope they got a little bit more lesson and stuff in old school. And if you're a new school fan learning about and want to learn about old school, keep coming back to this show.
Oh, God.
Listen and learn.
Thank you, Mr. Drason or Dave. I'll just start calling you Dave. Thank you for your supermouth comments and your wisdom. And your love of old school is so appreciated and respected by me. Believe me. I look forward to having you. And probably 2 weeks, I have one other guest booked for the next show who you might not want to listen to this show because he's not really old school in his antics, but Jeff Benson. He's independent wrestler and manager. He's coming on the next show. Well, Dave, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your effort, and I know it's getting late for you out there, and you're in Detroit, right? Michigan?
Yeah, I'm just north of Detroit.
Gotcha.
But that's okay. I'm sitting here with a great glass of wine, enjoying reliving memories of old school, talking old school, and somebody who can appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. God bless you, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks a lot, Dave.
I know.
All right, bye-bye. Well, that was a great interview, I have to say myself. I want to thank everybody who hung in there and listened. If you didn't hang in there and listen, well, then you missed out on a lot of old school. I want to thank Supermouth Dave Drason. His input, his love of the sport is evident, and part 3 will be coming up soon. And thank you, people out there, for making this show possible. I want to thank my security guard, Max the cat, who's sleeping, guarding the door. I want to thank my engineer, Pipes the cat, who's watching and waiting patiently for some kitty goodies, kitty snacks, and my newest addition to the DERFCAST family, my new agent, Cleo the cat. She's in the back room. We now, have 3 cats here, and I want to apologize for the last 2 shows not introducing them in the beginning, but we will get back to our regular format, and I want to thank again Supermouth Dave Drason, and also Bob from Bob's Radio Cafeteria for sending in those 2 great questions. And remember, you can listen to DERFCAST, all capitals, DERFCAST on iTunes and Ralph Tycho's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And rest in peace, Jimmy, Superfly Snuka. And we will be up and out on the internet tomorrow night. I want to thank you. This has been DERFCAST 55. And remember, stand up to bullies. It's that easy.